So this is the 2011 vintage, and maybe a little background is a good idea because in California, Northern California, this was one of the most difficult, and some of the winemakers in Napa have said probably in memory, the quality of the fruit was the most difficult to work with. And the reason was that there were heavy fogs in the valley areas in Northern California. And here in the Santa Cruz Mountains at Monte Bello, we're part of Northern California. We're not in the North Coast, but we're part of Northern California. And we're up between 400 and 800 meters. Up here it's 2,700 feet. And that meant we were above the fogs. And so we had a beautiful growing season. We worried because it was a very cool one. But when we got some great weather in October after the first rains, we were able to mature all of our fruit. On the other hand, people making Cabernet that wanted to make a very rich style and who had had that very cold, wet summer were trying for more ripeness. And they waited through a set of storms in November, and that was what really affected the harvest. But here at Monte Bello, everything was in, 91% was in before those rains. And so we feel we've got a vintage that will stand up with all of our vintages of this decade. And we've just completed the second assemblage. And Eric, why don't you give a little description of what went on?
Yeah, so the second assemblage was quite fast. We tasted through all the first assemblage as well as 4 possible lots that we had held out at the first assemblage. And in the blind tasting, we all, of course, loved the first assemblage. Beautiful wine, great dimension, perfect balance. And then we had 2 Cabernet lots that really stood out, and we tried those one at a time in the blend. And in the end, just chose the one Cabernet from the parcel we call Levasseur, which is right above the tasting room location. And that was a 6.4% addition. And comparing the 2 wines, I mean, both were great, but then the second assemblage with that additional cab just became this amazing wine with even deeper flavors, really classic character of Monte Bello.
And we had been so happy with the first assemblage in February. And for the first time, what, 13?
It was really,
well,
it was
actually
17 lots. I mean, it was really a complete wine at that point.
And even as the first assemblage started, our initial blend was something like 13.
Yeah.
And we only brought 4 more in the first assemblage because every parcel was showing so beautifully. And what happened then, we had these 4 wines, as you just said. Oh, and
we had,
we had 4 wines that we had more than that, but 4 that were contenders for the second assemblage. But the great thing was we had the biggest tasting we've ever had because we had the full team basically come down from Lytton Springs.
Team,
John Holding, the winemaker, always comes, but the head of the lab, very good taster, Gerald Marish, who's John's assistant, came down, and then we had our full group, and we included, as we've been doing, David Amadea from sales and Mark Vernon as president, as an excellent taster. So we had this huge room of people looking at this, and going through all of this, we only came up with that one parcel, the Levasseur, which just took the wine another step. The other good wine was so intense that it really would have taken it in a different direction, and yet is going to be an incredible wine to put into the estate. So at that, let's try
taste.
this.
I mean, we have just racked and put together the second assemblage.
So I'll give you these.
And the varietal breakdown at this point is 88% Cab and 8 Merlot and 4 Cab Franc. We're tasting from an American oak barrel here. Most of the barrels in this room are.
Oh, and it's showing beautifully. This is a vintage where the barrel malolactic early on really affected the nose. It gave it this marvelous nose, but
it was the roasted espresso bean.
Yeah, it was really that roasted coffee espresso character, and with each rack and with this last rack,
especially this rack,
it's integrating. And
yeah, the fruit has really come up. And the mineral notes, I mean, that nice limestone, crushed rock.
And what we do at the end of each, both the first and second assemblage, in the case of the second, we tasted this blind mixed in with the 2010, 9, 8, 7, 6. So we had all the recent vintages and with this in there, because when you taste just one wine, one vintage like this, you can get so focused on that that it's hard to place it in the context of your other vintages. And when you taste it blind then with a whole group, you can really see, is this of the quality of Monte Bello? And it definitely was.
Oh, it felt right in line.
And the fruit
texture,
was so
the tannin
forward.
balance, the fruit, the character.
So in what was for California, Northern California, a difficult vintage for Cabernet, we think here at Monte Bello, we really had one of our fine vintages.